What's up, Dragon Brood? So, when Kaldheim was announced, everyone was kind of waiting for standard rotation. We were hoping we were going to get rid of the world of the banned cards, get rid of some painful green enchantments we didn't like, and a few other things. And we were hoping that standard would clean itself up and we'd get a diverse format that people could enjoy playing with all their cards and all the colors. Did we actually get there? Well, honestly, yeah, I think we did. Looking over the first 2 weeks of Standard, we actually have a pretty good selection of decks. Here's the standings from one of the most recent Star City Opens, or Open Qualifiers, I guess is what we call them now, whatever. But regardless, a Star City event. And in these results, you can see that literally everything's playable. We have some Doom Foretold, we've got some aggro decks, monocolors, all the way down to Boros being a thing. We have some mid-rangey decks that are in there. All the different colors are represented. Like, that's kind of what you want out of a standard format. It also means that whatever cards you open, there's probably close to a deck you can build. So that's also pretty nice. So you're not necessarily having to hunt for cards that you can only play in the top 3 or 5 decks. And everything's not even shaken out yet. We're still learning stuff day to day right now. As a matter of fact, there was the Is It deck, I guess we'll call it Is It Tempo, that was around for like 7 days. And then magically seems to have disappeared, right? So things are moving so fast. We had a point where everybody thought that Goldspan Dragon was going to be the next big thing. Turns out it's pretty good, but maybe it's not the card to play in a lot of decks. Matter of fact, I just saw a discussion last night, I believe on Twitter, where people were discussing, well, I've had better success in these various green and red based decks that actually aren't playing Goldspan Dragon. So who knows? The good thing is, though, we're getting to play with all of our cards. Now, where does that leave you as a player when you're trying to build for this metagame? Well, that's a much bigger discussion. For starters, let's talk about an interesting fact that the sultai emergent ultimatum deck that's around has actually started popping itself up more often than I think people really want to admit. Myself included. I kind of stumbled on making this deck, middle to late last season. A few days ago, I just brung it back up, updated it with some cards, and it actually played surprisingly well. Then it turns out, who knew? It was a competitive tournament deck. Sometimes you get lucky. But this does mean it's starting to pop up enough that people are concerned about it. The question is, how good is it against other competitive decks? Well, here, as you can see, though it was one of the most played decks in this particular tournament, I believe this was a Japanese event that happened over the last weekend, turns out it didn't even have a 50% win percentage overall. Now, 2 players did finish in the top 8, but that's also not indicative of how the deck did overall. That's the type of stuff you have to keep in mind whenever you're looking at these type of results. Just because somebody made the top 8 with the thing doesn't mean the next 40 people that do it or play it are going to do the same thing. So you have to keep that in mind. Also, we see that things like Gruul and rogues that maybe didn't see as much play in some of these other events still have a decent win percentage. So it's not like those old decks went away, which is, on one hand, good news, because if you have those decks, they're still playable with minor updates. But bad news, because if you didn't like playing against those decks, they're still around, right? But that's a good thing overall. It means there's more decks and more people can play the events they want to. This is the standard we wanted to be in. Unfortunately, we're not all able to play in paper events or whatever right now, but at least for digital play, this is where we stand. Now, how do you combat this? I think there's really kind of 2 schools of thoughts here, right? The first is that when you're playing in best of 1, it feels like for the most part, you almost have to go 2 different directions. Either go way low to the ground and play some type of discard or some such, or graveyard removal. Mostly because Rakdos midrange is a thing, or Rakdos sacrifice, however they choose to build it, and having the ability to remove graveyards is actually pretty powerful against that deck. But also you want to have some type of defenses against those kind of mid-range to control style decks, or if you want to even call them mid-rangey or combo-y style decks like Sultai Ultimatum, right? That's where you're kind of wanting to be. But if you're talking about best of 3, well, then the gates open pretty wide. Now you just have to start thinking about your sideboard in terms of what are the top 6 to 8 decks at any given time. The thing I would say there, though, is be aware that it's a very constantly moving target, right? We're not settled in any way, shape, or form. As a matter of fact, who knows? These emergent ultimatum decks might not even be a thing in another 10 days. I mean, I assume they will be, but it's possible they won't be. You know, there's stuff like Timbults trickery. Everybody was concerned that this was going to dominate the format, and this was going to be the thing. We haven't even seen a Timbults trickery finish in the top 8 of a reasonably large event yet. At least I couldn't find one. Feel free to point it out. But I looked and I didn't see one. I think I saw one in one of like the small 20 or 30 person type events, but all the ones that had huge attendance, nothing so far. Now, is it annoying to play against? Absolutely. And I think it's bad for Magic in the sense that it's good against the worst of players because their decks aren't prepared. And that's discouraging. You don't want something like that. And truthfully, even if it wasn't anything that, I don't know, leads to non-interactive Magic, I'm never a fan of. We want to be playing our cards, casting our spells, attacking and having combats matter. Like, when none of that matters, then that's just not fun Magic. That aside, I don't think the Timbults Trickery deck is something we need to worry about. It is annoying when you encounter it on ladder, especially in best of one, because you're not going to be able to do a whole lot, unless you have maybe like Soul Shatter is a good answer. By the way, it's not even bad to have Soul Shatter right now, just because the emergent ultimatum decks are also playing things like Cure Best the Sea God, so you have a way to get rid of their 8/8. I mean, just a few different things going on that the card's going to be solid against. So consider just packing that in your sideboard, or main deck even, depending on what type of deck you're playing. Main, if it's best of one, you could probably play one or two main and others in the side, if it's a concern in best of 3. But what I'm getting at is Standard actually has a ton of options right now. We're in a pretty good place. You just have to really pay attention to what's out there and be very careful, because right now, we're running into opponents doing all kinds of things. Anybody who's watched my streams recently, we've even seen creature decks playing sweepers like in Doomscar or whatever. Like, why, I don't know, but people are doing it, right? Like, players are trying so many different things right now, and it's really interesting. Even that 6/6 Golem showing up in the middle decks to put 2 cards in the opponent's graveyard or whatever, right? So many bad cards we're seeing, but hey, people are finding ways to make them work. And that's good. People are finding more ways to play with more cards in Standard. This is literally what we should be asking for. Now, are there still a couple of annoying things? Yes, like I pointed out, Timbults Trickery, nobody's really a fan of that, right? Even somebody like Covert Go Blue, he played it on his channel, and I think he was like, at best, 50%, or maybe 4 and 6 or something with it. And half the time, the deck's just dying to itself. It either just misses, or you get the one thing and your opponent deals with it and you die anyway. So that's unfortunate. Then you have stuff like Ugin, which is still kind of meh, but Ugin is only really showing up in some versions of Ultimatum and a couple of the really high ramp mid-rangey type decks. Not really seeing a whole lot of Ugin elsewhere, but it does pop up from time to time, and it is super annoying, so you still have to be prepared for it. But really, outside of those 2 cards, we're seeing a lot of interactive stuff. Now granted, obviously I jokingly say like, rah, Yorion's the worst card, blah, blah, but honestly, Yorion is a fine Magic card. The decks it creates are boring to play against, but the card itself is fine, right? I don't really have an issue with most of what's going on in Standard right now. I think we're in a pretty good place. So if you haven't really considered Standard, I would say go for it. Take a look over the top decks over at MTG Melee, MTG Top 8, and just take a look and see what everybody's playing. You'd be surprised. We're in a pretty good spot. Now, will it stay that way? Who knows? I have no idea, but right now, it's really nice. Remember, if you haven't, please like this video, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. Let me know down in the comments how you feel about Standard right now. I'm kind of curious where everybody's at and how everybody feels. Because we had such a rough time for, I don't know, what felt like 5 months. So, I don't know. Y'all let me know what you think down below. Maybe you have some sweet ideas. Hop over into my Discord and come share some cool deck lists. I may feature them on the channel. Anyway, that's all I have for you for now. We'll see you next time.